All right, ready for another deep dive? You sent this in. Relación entre el huracán Milton y el cambio climático. Basically, Hurricane Milton and climate change. And honestly, this is more than just an article. This is about understanding how these storms we thought we knew were changing, like really changing.
Yeah, Hurricane Milton, it really might be like a sneak peek into the future. Because we're not just talking about like a hurricane forming. This thing went from 0 to 60, like instantly.
That rapid intensification thing, right? Like 1 minute it's strolling, the next it's sprinting. And they kept saying warmer ocean temperatures are fueling this.
Absolutely. So think of it this way. Hurricanes, they're like giant engines, right? And the fuel is that heat energy, that warmth at the ocean's surface. And they keep mentioning this temperature, 26.5 Celsius, like 80 Fahrenheit. There's a reason they do that?
Okay, because 80 degrees, that's like perfect beach day.
Yep.
But for a hurricane, that's...
Game on, that's the magic number, right? That's when the ocean's surface, it's got enough heat energy to evaporate massive, massive amounts of water. And all that water vapor, well, that's hurricane fuel.
Okay, so warmer ocean, more evaporation, much more powerful hurricane. That's kind of scary.
It is, because with all that extra heat energy, these storms, they're hitting harder, they're unleashing way more rain. The potential for destruction is just through the roof.
And it's not just the heat, right? They spend a lot of time on this wind shear thing. And like, it sounds simple, but then...
Wind shear, it can literally make or break a hurricane. Okay, imagine this. You're trying to build a tower of blocks, but somebody's got fans blowing on you from every direction. That's kind of what wind shear is like for a hurricane. It's the difference in wind speed and direction, but at different heights in the atmosphere. Strong wind shear can rip a hurricane apart before it even gets going.
Okay, that visual, I needed that. But how does climate change play into this whole wind shear thing?
So that's where things get really interesting and complicated. Some studies, they suggest that climate change, it might actually be reducing wind shear in some of these hurricane-prone areas. And less wind shear, well, that means it's easier for these baby hurricanes to become those monster storms.
So not only are we, like, making the ocean hotter, giving them more fuel, but we might be taking down some of their natural defenses too. We're really setting the stage here.
That's the concern. Now, it is important to say, research on this whole wind shear climate change link, it's still ongoing. These systems, they're incredibly complex. We're still learning.
But even if we don't have all the answers yet, this wind shear thing, that feels like a huge piece of the puzzle. Especially because then they go on to say this whole idea that climate change equals more hurricanes, like, that's a myth.
Yeah, no, that is a really common misconception. And this is where the details really matter. Climate change isn't necessarily about more hurricanes, like total. It's about shifting the odds, making the hurricanes that do form more likely to become extreme.
So not more hurricanes overall, but the ones that do happen have the potential to be way, way worse.
Exactly. Instead of like a season with 10 Category 1 hurricanes, we might be looking at a future with like 5 hurricanes, but 2 of them are Category 4 or 5.
And that's where Hurricane Milton fits in. It's like the textbook example.
And that rapid intensification, a nightmare for forecasting and preparedness. Imagine you go to bed, it's a tropical storm, you wake up, boom, monster hurricane's about to make landfall.
Okay, so we've got hotter oceans, maybe weaker wind shear, both potentially because of us, which could mean fewer hurricanes, but the ones that do spin up are way stronger. But they don't stop there. This article then goes on to say that these hurricanes are getting wetter, like insane amounts of rain.
In this part, this is actually like basic physics. Warmer air, it holds more moisture. Simple as that.
So the atmosphere is like a giant sponge. And as things heat up, that sponge, it can just hold more and more water, and then...
Exactly. More water vapor, more fuel for those crazy torrential downpours. We've seen it. Harvey, Florence.
Okay, because those weren't just bad hurricanes. They were devastating. And a lot of that was the flooding.
Exactly. Unprecedented rainfall. I mean, it turned these dangerous storms into catastrophic flooding events.
Right.
And that's the thing. It's often the flooding, not just the wind, that causes the most damage, the most loss of life.
See, that's terrifying, because I think, like, for a long time we all thought of hurricanes as like the wind was the main threat. We didn't really grasp just how much water these storms can unleash now.
It's about understanding the total impact. And speaking of total impact, we haven't even gotten to rising sea levels.
Oh, right, because just when you think it can't get more intense, rising sea levels.
Yeah, and this is where things get really concerning.
Okay, so we're already dealing with hurricanes that are potentially like way stronger, way wetter because of
Right.
climate change, and now we got to add rising sea levels into the mix. It's
Yeah.
like, what are the odds?
It's a huge factor, for sure. Even what seems like a small increase in sea level can make a huge difference when we're talking about hurricane storm surge.
Okay, before we go any further, can we back up for a sec? Storm surge. What exactly are we talking about here?
Sure. So basically, picture this. A hurricane comes along, right? It's like this massive wall of water, and it's being pushed toward the coast by the force of the hurricane's winds. That's storm surge. This abnormal rise in sea level, it's temporary, driven by the hurricane, and it's one of the most dangerous, most destructive things that come with these storms.
And because sea levels are higher now than they used to be because of climate change, that storm surge, it has like a head start.
Exactly. It's like starting a race way ahead of everyone else. That higher baseline sea level because of climate change, it means the storm surge can reach further inland, flood areas that might have been fine before.
So it's not just like the hurricane itself, it's that it's hitting a coastline that's already way more vulnerable because of everything we've done.
Exactly. It's all connected. Climate change, it's influencing so many aspects of these hurricanes. We're talking stronger winds, we're talking heavier rainfall, and now, yeah, those higher sea levels, and it all just builds on itself.
Not the domino effect.
Ugh.
And speaking of trying to get ahead of these things, they mentioned scientists using computer models to try and, like, project how these hurricane patterns might change in the future.
Right, and these models are getting really sophisticated. They're looking at everything, greenhouse gases, ocean temperatures, even shifts in atmospheric conditions. They're trying to simulate how hurricanes behave as our world gets warmer.
So it's like instead of a crystal ball, we've got science and data trying to anticipate what's next.
Exactly. And it's not perfect, but it gives us a much clearer picture than we used to have.
So what are they seeing? What can we expect, like hurricane-wise, down the road?
Well, the models are showing us, like we've been talking about, we might see a continuation of these trends, potentially fewer hurricanes overall, but the ones that do form,
Yeah.
they're more likely to be much, much more intense.
So fewer hurricanes, but when they hit, it's going to be a lot like Hurricane Milton.
Mm.
Rapid intensification, huge impact.
Right, and that rapid intensification, that's a major, major concern when we talk about forecasting, about being prepared.
Almost like trying to predict an earthquake, but instead of tremors, it's this monster storm out at sea.
Exactly. It makes it much, much harder to give those timely warnings, make sure people can evacuate, get to safety.
So we've got potentially stronger hurricanes, harder to predict, and then on top of that, this whole rapid intensification thing. Anything else these models are showing us?
Well, and this is important. These models, as good as they are, they're still simulations, right? They can't predict the future perfectly. There's always a degree of uncertainty.
Because as much as we'd love to have a crystal ball for this stuff, predicting the future, it's tricky.
Right. There's so many factors. Natural climate variability, those natural ups and downs, and of course, future greenhouse gas emissions. Those are big ones. It's hard to model that with like perfect accuracy.
So these models, they give us this incredible insight, but we got to acknowledge that there's still a lot that we just don't know about how climate change will impact hurricanes long term.
Absolutely. But even with that uncertainty, the message is clear. Climate change is having a very real, very measurable impact on hurricanes, and it's making them more dangerous. It's making them less predictable.
This is a lot. It's fascinating, but it's kind of scary. What do we do with this information? How do we even begin to adapt to this new era of hurricanes?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
It's a huge challenge for sure, but there are steps we can take, both as individuals and as a society, to become more resilient in the face of these threats.
So we've covered a lot. Hotter oceans, those changing wind patterns, all that rain, and then rising sea levels. It's a lot, and honestly, it's a little scary. But we can't just give up, right? What can we actually do with all this information? How do we get ready for these new hurricanes?
You're right, giving up isn't an option. It's about understanding the risks and then taking action. And there are things we can do as individuals, as communities, to be ready, to be more resilient.
Let's start with just like the individual. What can people listening do to prepare themselves, their families?
Well, the first thing is being informed. Know your risk. If you live in a hurricane zone, you got to know your evacuation route. You got to have that emergency kit ready to go.
Yeah.
And don't just make a plan, practice it. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, when a hurricane is coming, you'll be glad you did.
Yeah, like they say, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, right?
But beyond those individual steps, what about the bigger picture? Like community level, national level, how do we adapt? We got to think bigger. Stronger buildings, infrastructure that can handle those intense winds, the flooding, the storm surge.
So like seawalls, tougher building codes, maybe even rethinking how we build in these coastal areas in the first place.
Exactly. The coastlines of the future, they might look a lot different than they do now. We have to adapt.
And that's probably where those computer models come in, right? Not just for predicting hurricanes, but for like smarter development.
Absolutely. These models, they help us figure out which areas are most at risk. They can guide decisions about where to invest in infrastructure. It's huge.
So it's not just about cleaning up after these hurricanes hit. It's about trying to lessen the damage before it even happens.
Exactly. It's about being proactive, not reactive. And it's going to take everyone working together, communities, states, even countries.
Because like we said before, climate change, it's a global issue. These hurricanes, it's not just one part of the world.
Right. This article focused on the Atlantic, but the Pacific, the Gulf Coast, they've got their own challenges coming their way.
We're all in this together. Well, this has been, fascinating, eye-opening, and yeah, a little scary. We went from like hurricane basics to climate change to the future, all in what, an hour?
It's complex, that's for sure. No easy answers. But if we understand the science, if we see the risk, and if we work together, we can weather these storms, both literally and figuratively.
It's a call to action, that's for sure. To the listener who sent this in, thank you. You really got us thinking. And to everyone listening, stay informed, stay prepared, and as always, stay curious.